Hello, and welcome to another episode of Progressive West Texas, the show where we talk to leaders who are trying to make a positive change in our community. Today, we have another good episode. We are joined by Adam Hernandez. He is running for mayor of Lubbock. That election is going to be May 7th. We talk about why he wanted to run and what he wants to do as mayor. We are then joined by Nick Bergfeld, who wrote what is called the disparity report. And this documents why Lubbock has some of its economic struggles, why different neighborhoods seem to be neglected while we keep building new neighborhoods in South Lubbock. We do get into the weeds. Like, we talk a lot about kind of the intricacies of how the city works. But I think that's really important. Not only will you be able to see that change is easier or closer than we would like to admit, it also shows just how much candidates like Adam know about how the city works and how he wants to change that, as well as how many of our community members are starting to pay attention to this. And we know that we need change, and we're ready for that. You know, I was at a meeting where another one of the mayoral candidates spoke. And the thing that stood out to me is that his number one issue was that he felt Lubbock needed to lower its debt. But then every other issue he spoke about would only increase our spending. Those two things don't go together. You cannot talk about lowering debt and then only talk about increasing spending. That's not going to work. And I feel like so many of the candidates we have out here in West Texas, they speak like that. Their platform is not unified. They get away with not making logical sense or making promises they can't keep. For example, this mayoral candidate promised raises for teachers' aides. He has no control over that. He can help our school district get money. He can find funds for it in the city, but he can't tell the school district what to do with that money. He can't give those people raises, yet he's going around promising he's going to do that. That happens a lot in our area. And so what you're going to see is that not only does Adam not make those promises, he also knows how to get things done. He knows the process. Working as a community organizer, putting pressure on the city council like he's been doing for the last couple of years, he knows how all this works. And you're going to see that. And it's really exciting. And I hope you enjoy this discussion as much as I did. So let's go meet Adam Hernandez. Hey, Adam, how are you?
Good. Thanks for having me.
No problem. How are you? Are you keeping up with the campaign, or are you still? How's your energy level?
My energy level is good. I've
Good.
got a good team, and they're keeping me all scheduled. So I only have to worry about my part, which is good.
That's good. That's always nice. So, like I said earlier when I was introducing you, you're running for mayor of Lubbock, Texas, and you do have quite a big grassroots foundation that is supporting you, and a lot of people are excited that you are running. But why did you decide to run? What caused you to make that decision?
Yeah, so I got involved in community advocacy in the summer of 2020, and I just jumped in head first into it. I had never even registered to vote before that. I was 39 years old, but I had just read what's called the Lubbock Disparity Report, which outlines basically some policy decisions that led to some conditions that we experience in my native East Lubbock community, as well as some other older historic areas of the city. And so I just wanted to do something. I wanted to do something for my community. And so I became a co-founder of an organization called Lubbock Compact to start to engage city council and city boards and mobilize citizens to create some change. And so in the process of doing that, a lot of citizens and community leaders asked me to consider this. This is not something that I ever thought I would do ever in life, and definitely wasn't my idea. And so it took me about 3 months of deliberation and soul searching to make the decision, but that's why I decided to run.
That's awesome. And so you mentioned that there were like important issues, like you hit a few of them, but what are the most important ones that you see as being important as you run?
Yeah. So we're gonna have to do something with our infrastructure here in Lubbock. A lot of it is aging, and in order to revitalize our more historic areas, you're gonna need that infrastructure updated, and so that's part of it. And then there's also some other things that you can do to kind of spur neighborhood revitalization. So, for instance, we've advocated for, and it looks like they're going to pass what's called overlay mixed use districts, which basically just means that you can have a neighborhood friendly business inside your home. And
Mm-hmm.
so not only does that provide opportunities for that person in that home, but it also increases the economic activity in that area for the city. And so that's another thing you can do. Another thing we could do is just various policies to try to back up the school district, Lubbock Independent School District,
Mm-hmm.
to try to help them in the mission to stop school closures. We've had a lot of neighborhood school closures that in these older historic areas that then cause a population drain. Those folks go to the newer areas of town where the schools are newer and much more updated. And so those are pretty pressing issues as far as taking care of what we have. And then another issue that we're looking at, and I've been communicating with our local law enforcement and others for about the past year and a half, is we have a lot of youth getting involved in drug and gang culture. And so you have what's called hybrid gangs. So back, many years ago, it was pretty clear who the gangs were. You basically had like Bloods or Crips or something like that. Well, nowadays it's just basically cliques of kids who are creating their gangs on the fly. They're getting involved in selling drugs and things of that nature, because unfortunately you do have adults that are bad actors who are recruiting these kids to do these things. And then they get caught up in that whole lifestyle. And another part of that is we have a lot of break-ins in cars and houses, and these kids are looking for guns, and we know that because they're being recovered at the scenes of other crimes. And so that's a multifaceted issue that I feel like all of the entities of the city, the county, the state, and the citizens as well are going to have to really come together and try to find solutions to that, because there's just so many parts to it.
Yeah. So I want to go back a little bit. You mentioned these mixed use zones where basically people can start. You said neighborhood friendly businesses. So I was in a meeting where this was being discussed, and somebody kept saying, so if I want to start a coffee shop in my house, I can just start it. And that's clearly like not how this works. It is, like you said, it is neighborhood friendly. You have to think about the neighbors. But how would this help some of our older communities? You also said you're an East Lubbock native. How might this help East Lubbock?
Yeah, so for instance, so you can't just do it. You would need to apply for a variance with the zoning board of the city, and so there's a process there. But so this would help a lot of folks. So in our historic areas of town, especially in East Lubbock, where I grew up, and probably all across the city, you have ladies that are already providing daycare services, for instance, for folks. They pick kids up from school, have them at their house until the parents can get there and pick them up. So you have these things going on. Right now, they're just able to kind of do this hand-to-hand cash exchange, and it's not really viewed as a legitimate business. But if you give that person the opportunity to where they're authorized basically by the city to have a business on that premises, then that becomes in essence a legit business. And so they can have access to anything that any other small business would have access to, business lines of credit, for instance, or in situations such as the pandemic, like with the PPP loans and the EIDL loans and things of this nature. And so it really can provide an opportunity for folks to better their own situation. But again, it also adds to the bottom line of the city as well.
Hmm. Well, and like you said, especially with our older neighborhoods, that's why we're having these school closures, is because we need that revitalization. And it seems like this would be a very good way to revitalize these older neighborhoods. Do you know what maybe some of the resistance is? Like, why would someone not support this?
Well, we haven't had too much resistance. The one interesting thing that popped up that we're actually trying to advocate on now, which we didn't think was going to be an issue. So the cities thus far, the planning department has pretty much agreed to do these. We haven't really had any pushback from home builders or developers or anything, for instance. But there is a clause in there at the moment that they're proposing that basically says that the house has to be unoccupied for a year before you can then apply for this variance, which just doesn't make sense in any world. There really shouldn't be a time limit to get the variance, because if you look at that, let's say somebody, for instance, in East Lubbock, they've inherited the home from their grandmother. Um, they've had it in the family for 40, 50 years. And so you're basically, you're going to ask that family to move out of that home for a year and pay for some lodging somewhere else, to leave it unoccupied, to then come back to then try to start their business. I mean, it just doesn't make any sense. And there's really no reason for that. And so right now we're trying to get them to drop that clause. But that would be the kind of only thing, because really, if you put that in there, it defeats the purpose.
Yeah, it seems, yes, that does make sense. It kind of defeats that work from your home idea, and so then let's talk about. I want to talk a little bit more about the violence issue, because I tend to mention to people that Lubbock has the same rate of violent crime as Chicago. In both Lubbock and Chicago, you have a 1 in 99 chance of being the victim of violent crime. Um, what do you think might be some of these root causes causing this violence to pop up in our city?
Yeah, like I said, this is a multifaceted issue, but really, on the community side, you've got every extreme here, so it's hard to really pin down, because you've got one extreme where maybe mom and dad themselves identify as gang members and they have really
Mhm,
unhealthy things going on in the home. So you have that side of the extreme, but you also have the complete opposite extreme where mom and dad work decent jobs, the family is middle class, but that part of life when teens start to pull away from their parents, and then those parents kind of check out, and they're just not aware of what's going on in their kids' lives. And so a lot of times what we're seeing is kids are just lacking mentorship and guidance
mhm,
and things of that nature. We have talked to LPD, our local law enforcement here, for instance, about the possibility of them doing a softball league that they will run, and so that those officers can just be around kids, because a lot of this can be solved by just men being around. Because what's really going on, and this is across the board. It's across racial, across the racial spectrum and across the socioeconomic spectrum. We have a lot of single moms, and
mhm,
so sometimes mom doesn't have any men around. Period. And then some moms have not the best guys around, and it's just kind of hit or miss. But a lot of times these kids just don't have a male role model. Period. Just in their lives in general. And so we're trying to get more folks involved in that. I'm going to be going into some schools and working with some students, but I'm just one person. We need much more. So there's that side of it, and then there's also some things that we need to look into as far as how our parks facilities are. uh, How is the availability of those to people trying to do smaller youth leagues, for instance?
mhm,
Because a lot of people are coming up against issues where they're not able to book facilities and all of this. We need to take a look at that, because if we put more youth sports opportunities in these neighborhoods that are affordable, then you can get a lot of these kids active into something else
mhm.
besides sitting at home or going and getting in trouble. And so those are some things you can do. And the other thing that I'm looking at, or that I would propose to do, is to create a committee with folks who are that have expertise in all these different areas that we kind of need to look at, not just to study the issue and just leave the recommendations on the shelf, but to study it and try things and tweak and continue to do that until we have better outcomes.
Yeah, yeah, that's interesting. So is the city looking to expand any of these programs yet, or is that what you're looking forward to do when you step in as mayor?
Yeah, that's something I'm definitely looking forward to do, because what it seems like, and I'm guessing because it's an election cycle and it's so close to an election, it seems like a lot of things have just paused at the city council level. There's not a lot moving there, outside of just necessary business, basically.
Mhm.
And so there's really not a lot of movement there on the council right now, but yeah, it's something that I'm looking forward to doing immediately.
Yeah. So then the other thing that you mentioned was the disparity report. And so the next person who's going to join us is Nick Bergfeld, who he wrote the disparity report. So we can talk to you about that first. Before I want to do that, before we go into that, I do like to ask my guests a question, because a lot of what we do on here is talk about like kind of the heavier issues that Lubbock is facing. And so I do like to start out by asking all my guests what they actually like about Lubbock and what they like about West Texas. I know that on my TikTok, like when I say something about being in Texas, a lot of times people's first response is like, well, then you should leave. And I'm like, no, you don't understand. Like, there are good things about Lubbock. So Adam, since you're warmed up, what is something you like about Lubbock?
There's a lot I like about Lubbock. I like the spirit of the people here. It's hard to live out here. It's always been that way since people started moving out here. And so I like the spirit of people, the fighting spirit of people out here. I like the creativity that we have in our community. I've been an artist my whole life, and there's just so many amazing artists and artisans that come from this area, musicians. We have a lot of that. I was just talking to Larry Simmons. He's a big pillar of the community in our downtown Depot district, and he was saying there's just something about it out here that makes it a good place to create art. Unfortunately, the second part he said was it's not a good place to sell art. So he was talking about doing that online because it's a little rough to sell it out here. But yeah, those are some things I really like about Lubbock.
Awesome. Nick, what about you?
Yeah, I'd echo a lot of what Adam said. Both of us grew up in Lubbock. I think a part of it is just you have so many memories associated with parts of the city. It's easy to be sentimental about a community that you're a part of.
Mhm.
When I think about the citizens, I agree with Adam when it comes to the pioneering spirit. And part of that comes with this idea of the pioneering spirit is how young the region is. So Lubbock as a city is a little bit over 100 years old now. And when you think about the age of cities across the United States, most people don't realize that some of the youngest communities that you can find are actually, in West Texas, out there. And so it's a young city when it comes to its history, when it comes to its legacy. And so there's a lot of what exactly are we going to be going forward as a community? What will we be known for that our generation gets to answer? And I think that's just exciting. It's a city coming into its own. We're cresting the 300,000 mark for the county, and that means something. It means something from an economic development standpoint. It means something from a total amount of financial services that exist within your community, certain amounts of investments that get made, the types of businesses that you potentially attract. So many people thought we would never get an HEB in West Texas, for example, right? And I know a lot of people love HEB, and for the longest time, they thought, well, that doesn't make any sense for them to really want to expand into the West Texas marketplace. But as you look at the growth potential, as you look at the strength of the regional economy, it becomes more compelling for these businesses because of the growth that we've seen. So we're a metro in and of ourselves, and yet we had double-digit population growth, just like all the other major metros in the state of Texas, whether that be Austin or Dallas or Houston. So I think there's just a lot that stands out about the city as it was and the potential opportunities that we have as a community to what we will be.
Mhm. Yeah. So my one response to that is, and I'm probably going to get flack for this, but I'm a United person, and like when people get so excited about HEB, I'm like, I don't know why y'all are excited. I'm happy with United. When I went and taught in Hobbs, New Mexico, the dean of my department at the community college, she was taking me around. I think it was during the interview process, and was taking me around town, and we passed by an Albertsons, and I said, oh, you have Albertsons, so does that mean you're getting into United? And she just looked at me for a second and was like, you're definitely from Lubbock. And I was like, yeah, I guess you know someone's from Lubbock when they get that excited about United. But my loyalty is there. So no, I really
I'm the
appreciate
same.
y'all.
Yeah.
Say that again, Nick.
Oh, I'm the same way. I actually,
Okay.
yeah, I mean, even I even have just I won't say the nasty part of the story, but I've actually promised the former CEO of United Supermarkets, that if I ever step foot in an HEB, the only reason that I would do that in Lubbock is to take a number two in their bathroom. So yeah,
That's
it's
I'm sure. Yeah, I'm sure you appreciate that. When I was in living in Belton, Texas, I only had an HEB, and I just so wanted to unite it. But okay, yeah, like I said, I like to start with that because I think it kind of reminds us why we like the city as we dig into the problems that we have here. So Nick, the disparity report was already mentioned. You were the writer of that. Can you tell us like what is the disparity report and why did you go about writing this?
Yeah, the disparity report is an attempt to look at the city of Lubbock through the lens of inclusion, and also to look at Lubbock's history through the lens of inclusion. And the basic premise is that through data, you can start to tease out the history of haves and have-nots within the community, and also try to directly link those to choices that we have made as a community. I think that's an important aspect of reconciliation of when it comes to disparity within a community, because first you have to be able to show that there was causation, right? That there were consequences to actions that had occurred many years before that still continue to plague our city today. And what this document was meant to do, and what I'll say is that the data analysis, the work that was done in it, is something that I encourage everyone to think about in their own community. There are organizations across the United States in major metros typically that might have already done something like a disparity report. But
Mhm.
if you're in a smaller sized community, like say a Lubbock or similarly sized, oftentimes what you'll find is that this kind of information has never been put together before. And if you don't have that foundational data, if you don't have that foundational layer that really teases out your history, it makes it where conversations about the future and also what the pathway to reconciliation could be incredibly difficult to have. And so, what I would say, there's two versions of the document now. There's a massive collaborative effort that really expanded the document in the second go around and included new topics such as issues related to people experiencing homelessness in the Lubbock community, and also individuals from religious minority groups and the challenges that they can sometimes have integrating in a community that is overtly fairly Christian. So, we tried to continue to expand the conversations about, how do we interact with each other? How do we get a sense of what is the diversity? What is the breadth of our community? And how can we be aware, self-aware, and respectful of those elements within our community? And so the first document I would say focused a lot on economic disparity. That was
Mhm.
the core intention there. And what we did was we walked through a series of analyses about how population in the city of Lubbock has shifted. As Adam mentioned, there's been a change in where the wealth effectively of the city of Lubbock has lived and a continued southward expansion. And also what has happened to communities who effectively have been left behind by that process.
Mhm.
And the final piece, I think, of all of that is to point out how many of the challenges that we're facing are of our own creation and sometimes of deliberate design. So, one of the big ones that we initially started to fight on and to get involved on was the way in which that road dollars for both paving and creating new roads was being distributed in the city of Lubbock, and pointed out that over $170 million had been raised previously through people's utility fees in order to pay for roads exclusively in one corner of the community. So this
Mhm.
was the whole of the city paying for these things, every community essentially paying for new infrastructure that they likely would never be able to utilize. So when these roads were being built, and even to this day, bus routes actually from the older areas of the city of Lubbock do not connect to the places where these new roads had been built. So how is it that individuals in low or moderate income settings can even appreciate this expansion of the city's growth? And in fact, not only do they not appreciate it or benefit from it, but they actually suffer from it. because in the 21st century, one of the core elements that we know about infrastructure maintenance is that it's super expensive. And so a typical mile of road is anywhere between $800,000 to $1 million to repair. And we have an enormous amount of roads within our community that are currently failing by what's called the pavement condition rating index. Not only that, but we have tons of dirt streets as well. And I think that's a good segue to how the disparity report became something integrated into a broader discussion and around activism in the community. So this dovetails nicely into Adam talking about the Lubbock Compact as an organization focused on advocacy. And I think one of the first victories that we had, and I'm curious to get Adam's thoughts on this, was the road bond, right? And then the $9 million certificates of deposit that the city was able to utilize to try to rectify the enormous disparities in where dirt roads are in our urban city, in our urban community. And I only say that to point out from a zoning standpoint, there should not be dirt roads in our community at all. When it comes to residential areas, there's not supposed to be any. And yet the overwhelming majority of them are in the, as Adam had mentioned, the historic neighborhoods in the city of Lubbock, the what are predominantly Black and Hispanic communities. Those are some of the oldest neighborhoods in our city. So when you think about this idea of we really aren't supposed to, from a policy standpoint, have dirt roads, and yet the majority of them are actually in some of the oldest areas of town and continue to be that way, it starts to raise questions about the way in which that we utilize resources.
Yeah. Well, and you mentioned that some of these issues that we have are from deliberate decisions that we've made. And so this does seem like a deliberate decision. You would expect dirt roads in new areas where they haven't gotten to that yet. But these are in the oldest areas. And so Adam, how do you feel like the city has made deliberate decisions to cause that? And then how would you change that once you become mayor?
Yeah, well, you have to go really far back in Lubbock's history, pretty much to the genesis of it to understand where it started. And so basically, Lubbock itself was incorporated by a group of Klan members, Ku Klux Klan members. And so in 1923, there was an ordinance written that stated where Black and Hispanic families could live. We were only allowed to live in two parts of the city, which were in the northeast quadrant of the city. And so it was a very small area, and it pretty much remains the same today as far as the area where folks are at that are Black and Hispanic in our city. But that was the first kind of piece to it. And the reason that was done is because prior to that time, there wasn't a lot of Black and Hispanic people living in Lubbock. And so when they started to come in, that was the reason the ordinance was made. Then you fast forward to, and that ordinance, by the way, called Black people and Hispanic people pollutants, like the people themselves called them pollutants. And so that's why they needed to be, in essence, quarantined to these two areas of the city. And so then you fast forward to the 40s when the industrial zoning started to come into play in Lubbock for these cotton oil facilities and things of this nature. And so the ordinance said, as far as where these were supposed to go, it said that you don't put them in good neighborhoods. And so then they were put in the Black and brown neighborhoods, which is just another continuation or building off of that first 1923 ordinance. And so if you ask some folks in City Hall today, they'll say that, well, it was just because that's where the railroad was and those followed the railroad and then people moved there because they wanted the job for the railroad. Problem with that is that the people living there came way before all of that. And so so that was the genesis of it. And then you fast forward over time, and so resources weren't put in that area. And as a matter of fact, if you look at the population estimates from like back into the 80s, you'll see that they were already estimating that those were going to drop. The populations in North and East Lubbock were going to drop, and the populations in the South and West parts of the city were going to grow in the 80s. And so you kind of see this continuation. Now, how that was communicated or how that was kind of perpetuated is kind of unclear, but that's where we were. And so then you get to 2014, And that city council created what's called the Gateway Street Projects Fund. And so, as Nick stated, where the money comes from for this is called franchise fees. So when you pay your utilities in the city, those utility companies pay franchise fees for the right to use the right of ways. And so 40% of those franchise fees go into the Project Street Gateway Fund, and that's where that money came from. Now, that comes from all across the city, obviously, because everybody pays utilities. And as Nick stated, in 2015, when they started to disperse that money, it went entirely into districts 5 and 6 here in the city. We have 6 districts. It went into districts 5 and 6 mostly, part of 4, but pretty much 5 and 6.
And so those are the southern districts, correct?
Yeah, this is Southwest. Yeah, South and West. And so what that did was build out several new roads and wastewater infrastructure and things of this nature. Now, at that time, obviously that was coming from all taxpayers. Developers didn't pay any part of building out those new roads. That's what the gateway funds were used for. Well, one of the first things we advocated for was impact fees, which is a tool that cities can use to combat that, because what's going to happen when those notes come due, the roads are already going to need maintenance and we don't have money for that. And so that was the situation that put us in, that we were in when the disparity report was written. And the disparity report was highlighting the fact that that's unsustainable and that we weren't going to have that money and that we needed to do something about it. We did get quite the pushback from the developer community, home builder community about impact fees, but we did get them. So that was actually our first win. And then I think the dirt roads were probably part of the second win, because we actually had a few wins on that first budget session that we were involved in. And so one of those things that we got was, so the city already has an annual budget for dealing with dirt roads, but at the time it was set to 400,000. As Nick just said, it costs, 800,000 to $1 million just for a mile. And so that's not anything. Well, that year, because of our advocacy, they bumped it up to 800,000, which is good, still not enough. And so then came along an organization called West Texas Organizing Strategy that's been out here for a while. And so in conjunction with them and ourselves and others, we were advocating for further resources for dirt roads. And that paid off with the city doing $9 million over the course of 3 years. And they're going to start in East Lubbock, go to North Lubbock, and then go to the western part where there's some dirt roads there. And so that's kind of where we're at.
Okay. So I was paying attention to all that history, and there's a lot of it. And how do you think understanding the history of Lubbock and like you have an in-depth knowledge of that I have not heard from any of our local leaders. They might have it, they don't talk about it. So how do you think that kind of historical knowledge and understanding of Lubbock and where it came from, how do you think that'll impact you as mayor? Like how does that help you?
Well, it helps me because it informs us about where we're at. You have to be honest about where you're at before you can start to improve anything. I mean, that's within an individual or a city or an organization. You have to acknowledge where you're at and what caused you to get there. And then you've got to move forward from there. And through our advocacy over the past 2.5 years, we've moved the needle a little bit. So it's encouraging. But obviously, as mayor, I would continue that work. And how I've always said it and how I look at it is you have to have a mayor and a city council that's worried about it. And we just that hasn't been shown. I mean, obviously, our council person for that District 2, is very concerned about it and has spoken up. And to some degree, the one in District 1, which is historical North Lubbock. But for the most part, the others just at least haven't shown too much interest in dealing with this. And again, as you pointed out, that it's pretty unclear why. I don't know if they just feel uncomfortable about the conversation, or if they feel maybe we're blaming somebody now for things that may have happened in the past. But that's not the case. We just need to understand, hey, this happened. This is why we're here. It was unfortunate, but we can move on from here. And so what we do have already in place that I would just quickly move forward is the recommendations in Lubbock's most recent land use plan. It's called Plan Lubbock 2040. And so it was completed in 2018, but when we started our advocacy work in 2020, none of the recommendations pretty much have been carried out. And so we've been able to advocate for several of those to be carried out. But there's much more that needs to be carried out. And it's just up to the city to go through those steps. And so we actually do have a roadmap. And now, in my opinion, Plan Lubbock 2040 doesn't go far enough, but it's a great start. And it's going to take several councils to, really get all of this handled. But as far as starting out, that's a great start that we could do.
Yeah. So Nick, Adam mentioned impact fees, and he said that was like the first success that Lubbock Compact had. Can you explain a little bit about what impact fees are, why they upset the developers, and how that is a success for the older neighborhoods of Lubbock?
Yeah, the first thing that I'll point out, and I think this is good for everybody, we live in the state of Texas, and Texas is very developer friendly, right? Very property owner friendly in terms of our laws and things like that. So anytime that there is some deviation from total protection, things like that, or the influence of the public in this decision making, there's a reason for it. There's a unique reason for it. And so the reason why the state of Texas allows cities to have impact fees is because in the 21st century, growth doesn't pay for growth. And so as cities expand, especially like Lubbock has, where we've really grown suburbia, so 2-car garage, single family homes, detached houses, classically quarter-acre plots, now they're more closer to a fifth. But those types of properties, you think about the density of your tax base. How many people are in a geographic area, an acre, a square mile? How many people are there generating taxes to pay for all the things that you need to have there, right? So one example that I give is the Frost Bank building in Austin, I believe has a property tax value of something on the order of maybe $700 million, something like that. That is something like, I want to say 7% of the total value of properties in Lubbock. It's somewhere around that ratio, right? But here's the thing is, how expensive is it for Austin to get sewer lines, to get water, to get roads to the Frost Bank building, right? It's a single, square block. It's actually smaller than that. And yet it generates an enormous amount of value. Think about Lubbock from the flip side of that. So now we have roads that need to connect vast distances. We need water and piping that need to connect vast distances, but we actually don't generate the revenues to maintain any of them. And so this is what becomes the major challenge. And the state of Texas has recognized this. So they allow for cities to pass on some of the cost of building roads, new roads for new developments, new sewer lines, new pipelines for new developments onto the developers. And so the maximum amount that Texas allows is a 50-50 split, which in my mind seems fair. The public puts in 50 cents, the property developer puts in 50 cents, and that is how we effectively pay for the roads that are going to be built there. In the advocacy that we did here locally in Lubbock, we ended up getting a ratio that's 3-to-1. So developers put in 25 cents for every 75 cents, or every developers put in $1 for every $3 that Lubbock citizens do. On top of that, we ended up not incorporating all the fees that we could. So a city can have fees for roads, they can have fees for water, they can have fees for stormwater. So stormwater that's drainage, other water that's getting water that you can drink. And so you can have all three of those as a community. In this process here in Lubbock, we only have it for roads. We don't have it for the other two. And not only that, but we're not really asking for fair compensation or having the developers meet us halfway, even though we know as a community that the developments that they're building are actually going to cost all of us, right? That they can't sustain themselves. And so at some stage, the city of Lubbock and the rest of the city actually has to be paying and is on the dime for being able to make sure that they get the maintenance that they need. And we've seen unique examples of this that actually Adam knows a lot better than I do around issues related to water and this topic. There's a development just outside the city limits that is in desperate need of water infrastructure, but the developer intentionally built it right outside the city limits so they wouldn't have to effectively adhere to any of our costs, or that they would have to pay for these things. We have these issues throughout our community in different ways, but it really comes down to this idea of, does growth pay for growth? And in the 21st century, it doesn't. And so what do you do to try to mitigate that? What can you do as a community to try to pay for it?
Yeah. So Adam, Nick said that you knew more about the water and how we can start to work to fix that problem. So what does the city need to do?
Well, the city itself doesn't have a water problem for the moment.
Hmm.
Not that long ago, we spent about $700 million to make sure that we have water for the next 100 years. And I've been able to sit down with the director of water utilities, who is a very knowledgeable man. We have literally one of the best water people in the country here in our water utilities department. And so I got to sit down with him and pretty much get a comprehensive view of what was going on. So as a city, we'll be good on water. The issue comes in, as Nick said, with these other communities that are butted up against the city. And what has ended up happening is, so Lubbock can't annex any more land unless it's a friendly annexation, which means that community has to come to Lubbock and ask to be annexed, and then the council has to agree to that. And so what's going on is developers are stepping right outside of the city limits to develop a large plat with the idea in mind to later then ask to be annexed. Another kind of side issue to that is that, unfortunately, a lot of these developers and landowners are selling that land and developing that land knowing that it doesn't have enough water for the long term. And so again, because their goal is to then get annexed, and they feel like, well, they'll just get access to city water. Problem with that is there's more and more of a growing sentiment amongst the city that we don't want to annex anymore. We really don't like that because, again, it's a drain on our resources. So what's going on? So, for instance, we have a development called Highland Oaks. And Highland Oaks, they have wells. All of these houses have wells, but they're about to run out of water. Now, our developments in that direction are not quite that far yet, but there's about to be another one that's going to be built closer to them. So as it stands right now, our water pipe that they would have to build their pipes to get access to our water are pretty far, and it would cost them a whole lot of money. So their tentative goal is to wait until that new development, which is much closer to them, gets put in, and they're putting a water line there. And so the situation there is, long story short, those homeowners are going to have to eventually make the decision of, do they want to spend $10 to $18,000 per home to connect to our water? And that would be the cost of them doing that. Another community we have here, or it's a city actually, is called Wolfforth. And Wolfforth was at one time out by itself, but now Lubbock is basically surrounding it. And there's a large development by a company here going up over there, about 2,000 rooftops in a very short time frame. Problem with that is that Wolfforth doesn't have enough water for that. And now we already provide emergency water to Wolfforth, where we can give them water during certain instances, but they don't have access to just water all the time from us. So they've got two choices. They can be annexed, which they don't want to be annexed, or they can pay us 1.5 times the rate to hook up to our water, and they don't want to do that. And so, those are the types of issues we're dealing with more, or that we'll probably see more, is these outside suburbs wanting to be annexed because they need water.
Yeah.
And so that's something we're really going to have to keep an eye on and try to work on.
Yeah. And one thing that I kind of wanted to expound on is when you said that, like, Wolfforth used to be kind of out and away. We're not talking about like in the 50s or 60s. We're talking about like in all of our lifetimes when we had to go, do something out at Friendship. Like that was a drive. Like our parents were annoyed when, for me, it was choir, when we had to go do choir stuff out at Friendship because that was such a long drive. And now, our city just butts up right against that, and you don't even think about driving out there. So it's just been in the last 25 years that we've seen this expansion happen. And so one thing I know that, like, one strategy that cities did have for a while was this annexation. Was like, oh, if you annex more area, then you can get more property tax. It's always good. I know specifically Memphis, Tennessee, they were doing that. And then they realized like, oh, this actually might not work. And so they have actually de-annexed some of their sections. And they're like, no, 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 y'all are out in the county again. What are some of the drains on annexation besides the water issue?
Well, the one I'm hearing is mostly from citizens. We have a lot, as we've already talked about. We have a lot we need to take care of in our city, the city that's already existing, and specifically our historic areas of our city. So, for instance, outside of the historic northeast and central communities, our downtown is not a downtown. We're one of the biggest cities in Texas, and we don't have a downtown. I mean, to speak of. So
Yeah.
when you think about Dallas or Austin, those downtowns where they have shops and at night you're going to have clubs and bars and all of the things that are there, hotels and houses and condos. We don't have any of that. We do have some of it, but we don't have it to where we have a thriving downtown. And so we've got a lot to take care of within our current borders. And so that's really what I'm hearing from a lot of citizens across the city. And that's really not even along party lines at this point. A lot of people are just sick of even hearing the word annexation at this point.
Yeah. Well, and I know too that a common complaint in Lubbock is about our solid waste management. It's about our trash pickup, and and so I think we've all sat in meetings with Del Rio, who I really respect. He's over solid waste management here in Lubbock, and he talks about how if the trucks that have to go to South Lubbock, like they got a long way to go before they hit a few blocks, then they have to go a long way before they can get to our dump. And so that seems to really put a strain on cities is this waste management. People don't think about how like a downtown area, if you are built on top of each other, that waste management is much easier than going to back and forth to all these locations. So one thing I like to talk about solutions. I like to talk about ways that we can make things better. And so I want to ask y'all, like, if like what is one thing that you would love to see in Lubbock that you would improve? And I'm actually going to start this myself because one thing that I wish Lubbock has, and maybe Nick, if you kind of know why, like maybe like why we don't have this, but like we need better public transportation. Like I am not a fan of driving. I do it a lot. Like when I wasn't when I was going to school or teaching, 8-hour drives back to Lubbock happened all the time. I would much rather like just not drive. If we had a bus system, I would be so excited about that. I mean, we do have a bus system. If we had a reasonable bus system that didn't strand you, that didn't, I just remember even when I was in college, I had a friend who there was a bus stop by his house, but sometimes the bus driver just wouldn't stop because like it was easier for him to turn a block earlier. And so he would just wave at my friend like, "You're only one dude. What are you gonna do?" So Nick, do you know like why don't we have a better public transportation system?
Yeah, so I love that you went there because this is effectively the topic that I would have said as well.
Okay.
Public transit is essential for a modern city. You absolutely have to have it. It is what creates the connective tissue of your community. And also what ends up happening is that transit guides development for 21st century cities. So transit-based or transit-centric design is the name of the game for real estate across the United States. You ideally are looking for a light rail, so a little rail car type scenario or a bus route, things like that, because you know that younger generations put a strong premium on public transit. When you look at the number of driver's licenses that each generation has, as you go younger and younger, and I don't mean because they're too young to get them, but if you look at them at the exact same age as their elders were when they got driver's licenses, what you find is that the younger populations in the United States, Gen Zers just don't do it. There is a dramatic difference in their desire to drive and their interest within that versus living in tighter knit, more connected communities where walkability and transit are emphasized. And so transit in Lubbock has a really tragic history. I would say from a rhetorical standpoint, the biggest barrier there has been We've had many city councils who say that our transit system needs to be run like a business, and it doesn't. It doesn't need to be run like a business. It's a public good. You don't run a public good expecting it to turn a profit. You recognize that the economic impact that it has for your community, the way in which that it creates essentially additional amenities and economic uplift in areas that are connected, far offset the cost in your budget for maintaining and creating a public transit infrastructure system in that way. And so, just as an example, we don't have to go too far into this, but Lubbock, when it reached a population threshold, and I want to say it was 200,000, this is maybe about 15 years ago, we lost public transit financing because at the federal level, they assumed that as a city grows in size, that they have better capabilities for paying for their own transit. We graduated out of effectively a smaller city designation in the Department of Transportation to a big city one. And when that happened, we lost $1 million+ to our transit budget. And rather than actually trying to match that or top it up or whatever, we just let the budget fall. And so there was at that time a dramatic reduction, even in the limited transit services that we had in that period in time. The last thing that I'll point out on this, just because this is such a frustrating topic for me, the cost recovery ratio. What is that? The cost recovery ratio is on the operations of your public transit service, how much of the tickets that it's giving out, the contracts that it signs for night driving, sort of things like that, how much of your expenses as a community does that money offset? And in Lubbock, the cost recovery ratio for city bus, our transit service, is one of the highest in the nation. Right? So in terms of trying, and here's the thing, it's still negative though, right? We're still not, if you want to run it as a business, it's still not quote unquote profitable, right?
Right.
But it is already, scrimping and every single dime that it's possibly able to do. And it's effectively trying to punch above its weight. When, as I mentioned earlier, there are areas of town that it just doesn't connect to. There are components of it that just, if you think about it from a worker standpoint, there's just not enough frequency of service for it to be a meaningful, reliable way for you to trust. As you mentioned, your friend effectively getting the bird from the bus driver because it's like, I'm not even going to waste my time on that one. That's where we are, right? And so this is one of the common elements of feedback that Lubbock receives from Gen Zers, from folks coming up in the population, and just saying you've got to create these types of amenities for us to want to be here, for us to want to stay here.
Yeah. So you mentioned an interesting thing about how, Lubbock graduated out of that small city, like that so that we could get those federal funds, and we are officially a big city. In a lot of ways, like Lubbock, most people think Lubbock is a small city. Like I did grad school at Oklahoma State. Stillwater is a small city. Like Stillwater, and I know like Big 12 games, like the announcers like to give Lubbock a hard time, but like Stillwater's like 35,000 people with a university of 30,000 students there. Like Lubbock is not that. Lubbock is a big city. Why do people want to act like Lubbock is this small little city in West Texas? Either of y'all can answer that.
I'll give Adam that one because I think that just goes nicely into Capital of the Plains. And
yeah, this is something, it's unclear. It's unclear why people do that. I remember being shocked, and I can't remember when it was. It was a long time ago. It had to be very long ago because I haven't watched network TV in I don't know, 15 or 20 years.
Right.
But I had heard something on the news way back, and it was some city official. Again, I was checked out, didn't know who it was, but I just remember them saying that they wanted to keep Lubbock a small town. And I thought that was so counterproductive. And I also thought it was so outrageous because what in life doesn't grow? And why wouldn't you want it to grow? Like, it was just so strange to me. Why would you want this place to stay stagnant? The thing about it is that it's just not. We have world-class research capabilities here at Tech, as well as several other world-class departments at Tech that draw people from all around the world. You look at the Lubbock Lake Landmark. This is a world-class archaeological site. That's a very important site that folks don't understand. I'm very nerded out in the archaeology field. This is something that I've had a interest in for a long time. So I know these things, but most people don't know that. I mean, we get researchers and archaeologists, literally renowned archaeologists from around the world there. And that goes throughout the region because the Lubbock Lake Landmark is actually a part of a much larger research project that spans across Texas and into some other states as well. So we've got a lot going for us. And then when you think about the Texas Tech football program, for instance, now at one point when we had Mike Leach, there was a lot of energy around it, and then that kind of dwindled, and we've had some issues since then. But now that we have the new coach, Joey McGuire, he's bringing more of that energy in. I think that's going to they're obviously winning more now and getting a lot more energy. There's a lot more recruits coming from all over the country. So you're going to continue to experience this growth. And a lot of people like it when they come here. They like the city when they come here. The thing that's the issue is that there's just not enough to keep them here. But I'm not really sure where that mind frame comes from, but I am actively trying to combat that. And so when we talk about what can we do for solutions, so a lot of our advocacy work has spilled over into my candidacy, and it's just going to be a continuation, as I said. But one of the things that we were able to do, we talked about the Gateway Street Projects Fund. We were able to, so the language in it initially said that it could only be used for new roads. It couldn't be used for existing roads. So we were actually able to quietly advocate for that language to be changed. And so it can now be used for old roads, but not just arterial roads, but also feeder roads, which is huge for Lubbock because a lot of those are very old. And so the only thing we have to do is wait for that debt to roll off on the ones we talked about, those initial roads that got built in the south and west, which should be here in a few years. That'll start rolling off. So that's one thing we can do, because our city only has 3 ways we can pay for things. That's raising taxes, bonds, or grants. And then the Gateway Street Projects Fund now. So that's one thing is that we can do for solutions is find new sources or make sure we're using our sources that we have already more efficiently. Another thing, we talked about solid waste, and Miss Brenda Haney, who's the director of our solid waste department, is literally, once again, like she's literally the president of the solid waste organization for the whole nation, and it's also an international organization. She is actually literally one of the best. And so one of the things we are doing, or we're going to already, is you talked about the Southwest developments and how those routes, it's hard for them to get out there. They're also short staffed, so they have less people running many more routes than they should. And so one of the things we're going to is carts. If folks are familiar with Austin, how they do trash there, you have a cart. You got a green one for recycling. It's a trash can, basically, like a big 50-gallon plastic trash can. You've got one for your trash, one for your recycling. So they're already doing that in some of the cities. But another thing that we're moving to is what's called a transfer facility, because you talked about how they have to pick that trash up and drive to Abernathy, which, for folks who don't know, is that round trip for these trash trucks could be up to 2 hours, basically, as by the time they drive out there, sit there, go through the process, and then come back. And so the transfer facility will be somewhere here in town. And I asked lots of questions about this, obviously, because we're talking about trash. This could be something that could be smelly. And so I asked about that, but it's all taken care of. It's all indoors. So what a transfer facility is the trash truck would drive into this huge building, right? So you wouldn't have any smell, nothing going out in the neighborhood or anything. The trash truck drives in there. There's a big 18-wheeler underneath them. So there's like a basement, essentially, that this big semi is in, and they dump continuous trucks in there. Well, they can just dump their trash in this big truck and go right back out to the city versus going to Abernathy. Then the big truck, once it's full, goes to Abernathy. And so that's in the works. It's going to be a few years away, but that's some solutions we can have there. So there's a lot of things going on, and there's a lot of things we can do.
Yeah. And Adam, I think it's a very good sign for Lubbock, the fact that you get excited and you're interested in trash pickup. Like, I don't know that many of our city leaders are. Like, you kind of lit up when you're like, look, here's what we're going to do with solid waste management. Here's what we can do with trash. And I just feel like most of our city leaders right now, if you ask them that question, would just be like, I don't know, like somebody else is dealing with it, So I think that's a really good sign for Lubbock that that you get excited about these issues. But besides trash, what give me one other thing that like if you could just have your way, what do you think would help Lubbock?
I would say one of the most pressing things would be our park situation.
Okay.
There's so much that can benefit from that all across the city. So there's some park disparities in those newer parts, as a matter of fact, of the city. So there's some of that going on, but there's also some other things going on. So part of the Plan Lubbock 2040 recommendations were these gateway parks, in essence, where you have different parts of the city where people come in from. Basically having a nice gateway there that showcases the personality of the area and things like that. None of those projects have moved forward. Those would be really important. But another thing to this is how our youth softball or youth sports, programs are negotiated and handled with the city. So we have 4 big major youth softball leagues, for instance, if we just talk about softball. And they essentially have privatized the use of our facilities, which is not how it's supposed to be. If we have facilities and the rental cost is X amount of dollars, anybody should be able to rent it if it's available for the X amount of dollars, and not be able to rent it because you only brought the price, but somebody else brought more than the price. So we have some of that going on, but we also have situations where facilities will be available, but because one of those 4 main leagues basically has a contract with the city, nobody else is allowed to use them even when they're available. This stifles what I was just talking about earlier, where you're trying to get things for the youth. That makes it really hard. It doesn't foster the type of growth that you're going to need in the way that you're going to need it, and it hinders it actually. And so unfortunately, and I was talking to a youth softball league coordinator here who was kind of giving me this background. And the issues that he was having is there's some older parks in our historic areas of the city that these 4 main leagues don't ever play at. They literally never play there, but you can't use them because they're under contract. And so, again, these are our most in need neighborhoods. And he talked about how before the city ran them off of this park, he was paying them. He was doing everything he was supposed to do, but I guess the big league raised a fuss, and he ended up getting kicked off of this park, of this public park. And he was doing a league. He had 300-400 people out there, kids from all over that immediate area who would otherwise have not had that opportunity. And whatever the cost was for them, it was so cheap that literally everybody could come. There was no price barrier for these kids, and it had people from all over, and it was just a really good thing. And then they run them off. I mean, what kind of message is that sending?
Yeah.
And so we really have to look at these practices, and that's those holdovers from being a small city. When you're a small city, you can have these tight networks, and they make these handshake deals and all this kind of stuff goes on. But as you get bigger, that just doesn't work. And so we really have to kind of move away from the small town mind frame in a lot of areas.
Yeah. Well, and one thing that I did not realize that history of, with these fields, but I know that like my parents and people their age who were going to college in Lubbock, they talk a lot about like the church softball league. And there was like a bunch of different softball leagues, and my dad played on one, my mom played on another one, and so that and I did kind of wonder. I was like, was it just like, was softball just really popular for a while, and maybe it was, but it does make sense that we are not giving people that access. And so yeah, like people need access to these public areas. I know that when I've been sitting in city council meetings, I've heard some of our city council members make comments that seem to suggest that they don't understand why people want parks. Like they don't get that. And I think a lot of it is because most of the people on our city council are wealthy enough that they have a big backyard. They have a pool. They would never think about having a birthday party or a family reunion at a public park, because like, why would I want to be in public? I want to do that in my backyard. And it ignores the fact that like not everybody has those resources. Not everybody has a yard. And so I agree that if we could see an increase in an increase in spending on our parks would be really great. So my last question that I always ask my guests is, what gives you hope? And it can be specifically about Lubbock. It can be something larger. But I like to end on that high note. So Nick, what gives you hope?
Yeah, honestly, the conversations that we're having right now, growing up in Lubbock and being a part of this community for so long, this is the moment in time where I feel as though that change is possible.
Hmm.
That individuals within our community are stepping up and saying we need to take care of what we have. We have to find ways to honor our past and make sure that we do right by those who weren't part of the haves when it comes to haves and have-nots.
Hmm.
And to see the level of energy and activism and just overall goodwill about what the future of our community could be, that for me is really what does it, is just the sensation of this is possible here. And I think that's what I would leave folks who watch this, is that you can do what we did in Lubbock wherever you are. See if somebody has done something like a disparity report. If they haven't, download ours. You can do it. You can do this document. The elements in it are not things that are meant to be incredibly technical.
Hmm.
They're meant to show you where the challenges in your community have come from over time. Looking
Yeah.
at demographics and where wealth in your community is, looking at where racially minoritized communities live in your area, right? Putting all these things together and seeing how those have changed over time. We always have census data. That's something that will always be available to you. You can create these stories, you can create these narratives because they're absolutely essential for being the foundation of conversation
Hmm.
and meaning making and the creation of a new culture around reconciliation, around redevelopment, around revitalization and regrowth. These are conversations that I think everyone in every urban community in every city need to have and engage in.
Yeah. So what about you, Adam? What brings you hope?
Yeah, well, the one thing, the first thing that brought me hope is when I got involved in advocacy and started to see, again, I was 39 years old, had never even registered to vote. I was one of those guys that said it doesn't matter. They don't represent us. They're going to do what they want to do. All of those kind of things. And so when I jumped into this, I got my eyes opened, and I started to realize not only the power of my vote, but the power of the vote of a council person or a board member. And so that's as I started to get involved in the sausage making, if you will, and started to have some success in that, and started to understand how you can affect change. That kind of gave me a hope that I hadn't had in a long time in my life, and so that's been sustained through this advocacy. And so the thing that's giving me hope now, as far as this campaign, is the number one thing is I like to look at the math of the situation, right? As far as what any situation you're dealing with, if you have that option, it's best to look at the math. And so one of the deciding factors in me running was there a clear path to victory? And there is. We have plenty of registered voters here in Lubbock. We have about 184,000 registered voters. There's about 260,000 people, so nearly everybody is registered to vote. We've got plenty of those. The issue thus far, though, has been that only about 20% of that voting population is showing up. And so, of that 20%, you have a large minority really in the city, but ends up becoming the majority in those votes. And they've chosen the leadership time and time again. They've chosen the decisions time and time again for everyone. And so the math is on our side. So I'm
Mhm.
trying to give folks that information so that they understand that we can win this thing. So that's giving me hope. The other thing that has given me hope is, as I've gone through this journey in my advocacy, I was the one organizing and uniting people across the city. Um, but obviously here in Lubbock, the electorate is 65% Republican. They vote 65% Republican, 35% Democrat. And I'm an independent, but that's just how it is out here as far as our political landscape. And so historically, a candidate such as myself, who's independent, who has the background that I have, with the lack of a political background such as I have, normally don't get support from the Republican side of the situation in Lubbock. But I've been able to garner support from that side and every other side. And so that gives me hope, because as I'm having these conversations, I'm starting to understand, because again, we all have our preconceived notions, but I started to understand these people aren't all crazy.
Right. Yeah.
We can talk, we can have, and everybody, I don't care if you're Republican, Democrat, whatever, everybody wants good roads, everybody wants good parks. And so when you bring it down to the local level, you start to see that there actually is a lot of hope for moving things forward. And that's what I've been hearing a lot from people now being spoken back at me, people who support my campaign, and people who are just expressing, their feelings about my campaign. And that's what they say, is that I give them the hope that possibly if I get in there, we can see some change after all this time. And so all of that mixed together is giving me a lot of hope nowadays.
Yeah. Well, and I don't usually answer this question, but as y'all are talking about it, one thing that gives me hope too is the fact that all three of us are from Lubbock. We grew up here. We all left. So it's not like, we don't know anything else. We all left and we all came back, and we're all happy to be here and to be working with the community. I don't remember seeing that a lot when I was growing up. I remember the narrative being like, yeah, I guess I got stuck here, or, people had come back, like they weren't happy about it, whether it was coming from, I remember some of our teachers, kind of being down on Lubbock, or, whether at church I was seeing kind of, the older brothers, or something that would go to college and would come back, and that was never what they wanted. And I'm seeing now people that are from here, if either they might have stayed or they left like us, but they're excited to be here, and and it's not that automatic negativity. And so I really like that. So Nick, tell us, how can people find the disparity report and learn more about Lubbock Compact?
Yeah, so just go to lubbockcompact.com. Is the fastest way to be able to download the disparity report. It's on one of the tabs that you can drop down and link to. If you want to follow us in terms of the day-to-day, you can go to the Facebook group, the Lubbock Compact Facebook group, where we do a weekly live show giving updates about policies in the city of Lubbock and how things are changing. And we bring on guests within the community that are trying to affect change in a positive way here. And so you can see that content on our Facebook page. And if you want to know more about our advocacy and see about what we've been talking about, this disparity report, lubbockcompact.com.
Awesome. And Adam, how can people find out more about your campaign and help?
Yeah, so you can go to the website. It's adamhformayor.com. It links to all of the social medias. We're on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. So you can follow us on all those places. I haven't started my TikTok yet, but we're going to get it going here really quick. But yeah, for now, we've got the Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. So you can go on there to keep up. We're constantly posting about what's going on with the campaign, where I'm at, all of the talks and all of that. So you're able to follow that. As of right now, we're in the need of reaching many more voters. So the most likely outcome of this is that I'm about to be headed off into a runoff with one of the other candidates. And so we would appreciate everyone's contributions, because we need to get lots of prints and lots of ads. And so you can do that on the website. And there's also the address there if you would like to send a check versus a PayPal.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, guys, thank you so much for being on. I really appreciate it. I think this was a really good discussion about Lubbock and all of its possibilities.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Yeah. All right. And we'll leave it there. I really appreciate y'all joining us for another week, and I will see you next time.